When Sophie Matthews is called to save an ailing racehorse, she never expects to clash with its ruthless owner, Ethan Carter. But as she heals the stallion, she begins to mend the guarded heart of the man who owns him. Will love bloom? Or will pride cost them everything? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun crept over the rolling hills of Willow Creek as Sophie Matthews tightened the worn leather straps of her satchel. At 32, she'd spent most of her life in this small farming community, known by locals as the woman who could heal animals when everyone else had given up hope. "Heading out already?" her mother called from the porch of their modest farmhouse. The white paint was peeling, and the roof needed repairs they couldn't afford. "Got a call about the Henderson's mare. Colic again," Sophie replied, tucking a strand of honey-brown hair behind her ear. "Should be back by noon." Her mother nodded, worry lines etched around her eyes. "Don't forget, the bank called yesterday, third time this week." Sophie's shoulders tensed. The mortgage payments were 3 months behind, and the threat of foreclosure loomed larger each day. "I know, Mama. I'll figure something out." The truth was, Sophie's gift with animals didn't pay much. People around here traded eggs or fresh milk for her services, sometimes cash when they could afford it. It was enough to get by, barely, but not enough to save their small family farm. She mounted her old quarter horse, Penny, patting the mare's neck affectionately. "At least I've got you, girl," she whispered. The 20 miles away, in a sprawling estate with pristine white fences and manicured paddocks, Ethan Carter slammed the phone down in frustration. "What do you mean there's nothing more?" "You can do?" he demanded, glaring at the veterinarian who stood nervously in his expansive home office. "I've paid you a fortune." Dr. Williams shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter. We've tried every treatment available. Storm King's condition is deteriorating rapidly. At this rate—" "Don't say it," Ethan warned, his voice dangerously low. At 45, he'd built Carter Thoroughbreds from nothing into one of the most prestigious racing stables in the country. His horses didn't lose races, and they certainly didn't die from mysterious illnesses. "The Belmont Stakes are in 3 months, Ethan continued, pacing the room. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked his private track where, until 2 weeks ago, Storm King had been training for the biggest race of the season. "That horse is worth $8 million. Fix him." "Mr. Carter," the vet tried again, "we've brought in specialists from across the country. Nobody can determine what's wrong with him." Ethan ran a hand through his dark hair, now streaked with distinguished silver at the temples. "Then what good are any of you?" he muttered. "Get out." Left. Alone, Ethan loosened his tie and poured himself a glass of bourbon. Storm King wasn't just a valuable racehorse. He was the culmination of Ethan's breeding program, the horse that would cement his legacy in the racing world. More importantly, the stallion represented the final piece of his plan. Jameson Racing had outbid him on the Kentucky property he'd wanted for years. After the embarrassment of losing that deal, Ethan had been planning his comeback. Once Storm King won the Triple Crown, Ethan would sell him to Jameson at a price that would make headlines, then use the money to buy out Jameson's entire operation. It would be the sweetest victory of his career. Now those plans were falling. Apart as Storm King wasted away in his stall, "Mr. Carter?" His assistant Rebecca appeared at the door. "Your meeting with the investors is in 30 minutes. Ethan nodded absently. "Tell Jackson to prepare the helicopter. There's one more thing," Rebecca added hesitantly. "The stable manager mentioned a woman from one of the local farms. Apparently she has some reputation for healing horses when conventional methods fail." Ethan scoffed. "Some country folk remedy. I've spent hundreds of thousands on the best veterinary care in the world." "I understand, sir. Just thought I'd mention it." After Rebecca left, Ethan stood at the window, staring at the stables in the distance. He'd built his empire on hard facts and calculated risks, not desperate measures or local superstitions. But as the days passed and Storm King's condition worsened, desperation began to set in. Sophie was cleaning out the Henderson stable when her phone rang. "Miss Matthews?" a crisp, professional voice asked. "This is Rebecca Taylor, Mr. Ethan Carter's executive assistant. Mr. Carter would like to discuss the possibility of hiring your services for one of his horses." Sophie almost dropped her phone. Everyone in the county knew of Ethan Carter and his million-dollar racehorses. "I think there's been some mistake," Sophie replied. "I'm not a veterinarian." "Mr. Carter is aware of that. He's been informed of your unique abilities with horses. His driver can pick you up tomorrow morning at 9 if you're available." Sophie hesitated. The Carters of the world usually looked down on people like her, people who trusted intuition over science and formal education. But the mention of payment made her think of the past due notices piling up on their kitchen table. "I'll be ready at 9, she finally agreed. That evening, as Sophie told her mother about the call, Martha Matthews looked concerned. "That Carter man has a reputation, Sophie. He steamrolls over people to get what he wants. Promise me you'll—" "Be careful," Sophie nodded, but her mind was already racing with the possibilities. If she could help one of Ethan Carter's valuable racehorses, the payment might be enough to save their farm. The following morning, Sophie waited by her mailbox in her cleanest jeans and a simple blue blouse. When a sleek black SUV pulled up, she felt painfully out of place. The driver, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her monthly expenses, opened the door without a word. The hour-long drive to the Carter estate passed in silence that made Sophie increasingly nervous. The property, when they finally arrived, took her breath away. The main house was a sprawling mansion that overlooked countless acres of fenced pastures where thoroughbreds grazed. The stables looked cleaner than most houses Sophie had been in. As she stepped out of the car, a tall man in an expensive suit approached. His face was handsome but severe, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they saw in terms of dollar signs. "Miss Matthews," Ethan Carter said, extending his hand. His grip was firm and businesslike. "I appreciate you coming on such short notice." "Mr. Carter," Sophie replied, trying to hide how intimidated she felt. "I should tell you up front that my methods are unconventional. At this point, I'm willing to try anything," he said, though his tone suggested skepticism. "My horse has been seen by the top veterinary specialists in the country, none of whom can explain his condition. I don't normally resort to—" He paused, searching for a diplomatic word. "Alternative approaches." Sophie met his gaze directly. "I understand. I'm not promising miracles, Mr. Carter. I'd just like to see your horse." He nodded curtly and led her toward the main stable. As they walked, Sophie noticed the immaculate grounds, the staff hurrying about their duties, and the general air of wealth and precision that surrounded everything. "Storm King is our champion," Ethan explained as they approached a separate barn, more luxurious than the others. 3 weeks ago, he began showing signs of lethargy. His appetite decreased, then vanished. He's lost significant weight and muscle tone. The vets have ruled out colic, infection, and all common equine illnesses. Inside the air-conditioned stable, they approached a stall larger than Sophie's bedroom. Inside stood a magnificent dark bay thoroughbred, or what had once been magnificent. Even Sophie could see the difference between this animal and the glossy, muscular horses in the pastures. Storm King's coat had lost its shine, his head hung low, and his once powerful frame had begun to waste away. "May I?" Sophie asked, indicating. She wanted to enter the stall. Ethan nodded to a stable hand who opened the gate. As Sophie stepped inside, she noticed several people gathering to watch. Stable managers, grooms, and what she assumed were veterinarians, all observing with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disdain. Sophie ignored them, focusing entirely on the horse. She approached slowly, speaking in soft, soothing tones. "Hey there, beautiful," she murmured, letting the stallion catch her scent. Storm King raised his head, slightly dark eyes regarding her with what seemed like weariness beyond mere physical exhaustion. Sophie moved unhurriedly, running her hands along his neck, shoulders, and flanks. Her touch was gentle but purposeful as she felt for tension, heat, or any physical clues. Then she simply stood with him, one hand resting on his withers, the other on his chest, her eyes closed in concentration. Outside the stall, she heard murmurs and a few derisive chuckles. "Is this some kind of joke?" a man in a white coat whispered, loudly enough for her to hear. "Let her work." Ethan's authoritative voice silenced the commentary. After several minutes, Sophie opened her eyes and turned to Ethan. "I'd like to see where he exercises, and I need to know his daily routine, everything from feeding schedules to who handles him." Ethan raised an eyebrow but gestured for her to exit the stall. "Jackson will show you anything you need to see." "Actually," Sophie said, finding courage she didn't know she had, "I'd prefer if you showed me. You're the one who spends the most time with him, aren't you?" Something flickered across Ethan's face, surprise, perhaps, or discomfort. "My stable manager handles the day-to-day operations. I oversee the business aspects." "So you don't work with your horses directly?" Sophie asked, genuinely surprised. Ethan's jaw tightened. "I don't have time to play horse whisperer, Miss Matthews. I employ professionals for that." "I see," she replied, unable to hide her disappointment. In her experience, animals often reflected the energy of their owners. "Then I'd like to speak with whoever spends the most time with Storm King." The tour of the facilities was impressive, but revealed nothing unusual. The interview with Storm King's handlers was similarly uninformative, though Sophie noted that the horse had different people handling different aspects of his care. One person for feeding, another for grooming, others for exercise and training. As the afternoon wore on, Sophie could feel Ethan's patience wearing thin. "Do you have any actual insights, Miss Matthews, or was this a waste of everyone's time?" he finally asked, as they stood outside Storm King's stall once more. Sophie took a deep breath. "Your horse isn't physically ill, Mr. Carter." Ethan frowned. "So what do you mean? Look at him. His symptoms are physical, yes, but the cause isn't a disease or injury. Storm King is depressed." A laugh escaped one of the veterinarians. "Depression? That's your professional diagnosis?" Sophie continued, addressing Ethan directly. "Horses are herd animals. They form deep bonds. Storm King has half a dozen different handlers, but no real connection with any of them. Or with you. He's isolated in this fancy stall, brought out, only to train. He's surrounded by people but completely alone." Ethan's expression hardened. "So your solution is what? Group therapy? Should I read him bedtime stories?" Some of the staff snickered, but Sophie didn't back down. "My solution is to give him a friend, another horse he can bond with, and someone consistent who cares for him, not just a rotation of employees." She paused, then added, "And yes, you should spend time with him. Not training, not working, just being with him." "That's ridiculous," Ethan said dismissively. "These are racehorses, not pets. They're living creatures with emotional needs," Sophie countered. "Ignore those needs, and this is what happens." She gestured to Storm King. Ethan checked his watch. "Thank you for your time, Miss Matthews. Jackson will see that you're compensated for the visit." He turned to leave. "He won't recover without changes," Sophie called after him. "The medicine he needs can't be injected or swallowed." Ethan paused but didn't turn around. "I'll take that under advisement." After he left, one of the stable hands approached Sophie. "I'm Carlos," he said quietly. "I think you're right about Storm King, but Mr. Carter won't listen." "He never does." Sophie looked back at the dejected horse. "Would you let me try something before I go?" Carlos glanced around nervously, then nodded. "Just be quick about it." Sophie entered Storm King's stall again, carrying her satchel. From it, she removed a small pouch of herbs and a bottle of liquid. She mixed a little of both into a dish of water. "This isn't medicine," she explained to Carlos. "It's just calming herbs like chamomile and lavender. It won't heal him, but it might help his anxiety a little." As she offered the dish to Storm King, she stroked his neck and whispered softly to him. To her surprise, the horse drank the water entirely, then nudged her hand gently with his nose. "See that?" she said to Carlos. "He's asking for a connection." Carlos nodded, looking thoughtful. "I'll try spending extra time with him when I can." Sophie gave him her phone number. "Call me if you see any changes, good or bad." Outside, the black SUV waited to take her home. As they drove away, Sophie gazed back at the beautiful estate with mixed emotions. She had been dismissed, her advice, ignored by a man too focused on winning to see what his horse really needed. Yet something about Ethan Carter stayed with her. Not his wealth or his handsome face, but the glimpse of loneliness she'd caught in his eyes when she suggested he spend time with his horse. It had mirrored Storm King's isolation perfectly. Back home, as Sophie recounted the day's events to her mother, Martha shook her head. Sounds like that horse isn't the only one who's lonely in that big fancy place. Sophie nodded, thinking of Ethan's cold mansion and colder demeanor. It's sad, really. All that money and he can't see what matters. Later that evening, an envelope arrived by courier. Inside was a check for $500, generous by local standards but pocket, changed to someone like Ethan Carter. There was no note, no message, just the payment for services rendered and dismissed. Sophie sighed as she placed the check on the kitchen table. It would help with bills, but not enough to save their farm. More importantly, it hadn't helped Storm King. She wondered if she would ever hear from Ethan Carter again, never imagining that in just 3 days her phone would ring at midnight and his voice, desperate and humbled, would be on the other end of the line. "Miss Matthews, it's Ethan Carter. Storm King has collapsed. I need you here now." Sophie's heart raced as she threw on her clothes and grabbed her satchel. Her mother stood in the hallway, tightening the belt of her robe with concern etched across her face. "You are going there now, in the middle of the night?" "I have to, Mama. The horse is dying." Sophie's hands trembled as she stuffed herbs and tinctures into her bag. "Mr. Carter is sending someone to pick me up," Martha Matthews sighed. "That man has 100 employees. Why does he need you rushing out at midnight?" Sophie had wondered the same thing, but the desperation in Ethan's voice had caught her off guard. The proud, dismissive man who had practically shown her the door 3 days. Her had sounded broken. "Because now he's scared," she said simply. Headlights swept across their front porch 15 minutes later. This time it wasn't a driver in the SUV, but Ethan himself, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled, his expression tense. "Thank you for coming," he said as Sophie climbed in. The politeness sounded forced, like a man unused to expressing gratitude. "What happened?" she asked as they sped down the dark country roads. "He was fine yesterday. Well, not fine, but stable. Then tonight he just collapsed. Won't get up, barely responding." Ethan's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "The vet says we should consider putting him down before he suffers more." Sophie studied Ethan's profile in the dim light. "Did you try any of my suggestions?" A muscle twitched in his jaw. "We adjusted his feeding schedule." "That's it?" "Miss Matthews, I run a business, not a petting zoo. My horses are athletes trained for competition." "And look how well that's working out," Sophie replied, then immediately regretted her sharpness. "I'm sorry, that was unkind." To her surprise, Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "No, you're right. My methods have failed him completely." He paused, then added more quietly, "I've failed him." The admission hung in the air between them as they drove in silence the rest of the way. The stable was lit up and buzzing with activity when they arrived. A team of veterinarians hovered around Storm King's stall, where the once mighty horse lay on his side, breathing shallowly. "Make way," Ethan commanded, and the crowd parted instantly. Sophie knelt beside the horse, placing her hands gently on his neck. His eyes were dull, his breathing labored. She could feel his surrender, his willingness to let go. "Everyone out," she said firmly. The veterinarians looked too, Ethan who nodded. "Give her space." When they were alone with Storm King, Sophie turned to Ethan. "Sit with him." "What?" "Sit down next to his head. Let him know you're here." Ethan hesitated, looking uncomfortable, but then lowered himself to the stable floor beside Storm King's head. His expensive pants would be ruined, but he didn't seem to care. "Now what?" he asked. "Talk to him," Sophie instructed, as she prepared a mixture from her satchel. "Tell him why you need him to fight." Ethan cleared his throat awkwardly. "I'm not sure what to say." "Just talk. About anything. He needs to hear your voice." As Sophie worked, Ethan began speaking stiffly at first, then with growing emotion. "You can't give up now, Storm. We've put too much into this. The Belmont Stakes are waiting for you." His voice softened. "My father always said I'd never amount to anything. Every race you win proves him wrong." Sophie listened while applying a poultice to Storm King's chest. She could feel Ethan's barriers coming down as he continued talking, revealing more than he likely intended. "I was 12 when he lost the family farm," Ethan said, almost to himself now. "Everything gone in a bad deal. He drank himself to death, within a year. My mother took me to live with her sister in the city, but I swore I'd get back to the land someday. I swore I'd build something no one could take away. Sophie paused in her work, touched by the unexpected vulnerability. Is that why you started breeding horses? Ethan seemed surprised, as if he'd forgotten she was there. Partly. I worked at a racing stable through college, learned the business from the ground up. So you did use to work directly with the horses? Lifetime ago. His hand moved hesitantly to Storm King's forelock, brushing it gently. I haven't actually groomed a horse in years. Maybe that's part of the problem, Sophie suggested softly. She offered Ethan a small jar of herbal paste. Rub this on his gums. It'll help with pain and might stimulate his appetite. As Ethan carefully applied the paste, Sophie continued her examination. His vital signs are weak but steady. I think he might be experiencing something called learned helplessness. What's that? When an animal believes nothing they do matters, they stop trying. They give up. Sophie looked directly at Ethan. It happens when they have no control over their environment, no choices, no freedom to be what they naturally are. Ethan frowned. He's a racehorse. His purpose is to race. He's a horse first, Sophie countered. Racing is what you want from him. But what does he get in return? The question hung between them as Sophie continued treating Storm King with gentle, methodical care. She mixed herbs into warm water and coaxed the horse to drink small amounts. She massaged his legs and spoke to him in soft, encouraging tones. Hours passed. Outside the stall, staff members occasionally checked in, only to be waved away by Ethan, who remained on the floor beside his horse, following Sophie's instructions, without complaint. As dawn broke, Storm King's breathing became stronger. His eyes seemed more alert, tracking their movements. He's responding, Sophie said, the fatigue in her voice mixed with cautious optimism. But he's not out of danger. He needs a reason to live. Ethan ran a hand over his stubbled jaw. What can I do? Stay with him, Sophie said. Not just now, in the coming days. Be the one who feeds him, grooms him. Let him know you care about him, not just what he can do for you. Ethan looked skeptical. I have a business to run. And he's supposedly your most valuable asset, Sophie reminded him. Investment bankers work 80-hour weeks for their most important clients. Consider this the same thing. To her surprise, Ethan smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face. You don't mince words, do you, Miss Matthews? Sophie, she corrected. And no, I don't have that luxury. In my work, being direct saves lives. Sophie, he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. What else does he need? Company, a companion horse, preferably a calm one who can stay in the stall next to his. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. I have a retired mare who might work. By mid-morning, Storm King had improved enough to attempt standing. With Sophie's guidance and Ethan's support, the stallion wobbled to his feet. The stable erupted in cheers from the staff who had gathered to witness what many were already calling a miracle. This is just the beginning, Sophie cautioned them. He has a long recovery ahead. As the excitement died down and the staff returned to their duties, Ethan pulled Sophie aside. Thank you, he said, the words clearly unfamiliar on his tongue. Your bill. Name your price. Sophie felt a flicker of disappointment. Of course it would come back to money with him. $2,000, she said, thinking of the mortgage payments they needed to catch up on. Ethan blinked. That's all? For saving an $8 million horse? That's what I need, Sophie replied simply. I'll have Rebecca draw up a contract. For your continued services, we'll need you to oversee his recovery. Sophie hesitated. The money would be welcome, but something felt wrong about the arrangement. Mr. Carter, Ethan, he corrected, echoing her earlier sentiment. Ethan, she amended. I can't be just another employee who comes and goes. If you want Storm King to heal completely, you need to be the one spending time with him. I told you, I don't have time. Make time, Sophie interrupted, or accept that he won't fully recover. Ethan's face hardened, the vulnerable man from the night before retreating behind the businessman's mask. Everyone makes time for the right price, Sophie. Name yours. Sophie shook her head, suddenly tired beyond words. Not everyone and not everything can be bought. In my experience, that's rarely true, he replied coolly. Then your experience has been limited, Sophie said. She gathered her things, fighting disappointment. For a few hours she'd glimpsed a different man beneath Ethan's polished exterior, someone who cared deeply, who had known loss and struggled to overcome it. But now the wall was back up higher than before. I'll come back tomorrow to check on Storm King, she said. After that, it's up to you whether he thrives or merely survives. True to her word, Sophie returned the next day. To tea. Her surprise, she found Ethan in Storm King's stall, awkwardly attempting to brush the horse's coat. You're doing it wrong, she said from the doorway. Ethan turned, seeming almost embarrassed to be caught. I'm a bit out of practice. Here. Sophie stepped into the stall and demonstrated the proper technique. Long, smooth strokes in the direction of hair growth. It's not just about making him look pretty, it stimulates circulation and shows him affection. As Ethan followed her example, his movements becoming more natural, Sophie noticed small changes in Storm King. The horse's ears flicked toward Ethan attentively, and he leaned slightly into the brushstrokes. He's responding to you, she observed. Is he? Ethan asked, a note of genuine pleasure in his voice. Horses know when someone cares. They can sense intention. Ethan frowned slightly. I've always cared. I've invested millions in this stable. Money isn't care, Sophie said gently. Time is. Attention is. Being present is. To her surprise, instead of bristling, Ethan considered her words thoughtfully. My father used to say something similar about farming. The best fertilizer is the farmer's footsteps. Meaning, you have to be present on your land for it to thrive, Sophie finished, smiling. My dad said the same thing. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of shared values beneath their obvious differences. Would you... Ethan paused, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. Would you be willing to come regularly, to supervise his care and perhaps show me what I've forgotten? The request caught Sophie off guard. I thought you wanted to hire me as another employee. I'm not asking as an employer, Ethan clarified. I'm asking as someone who needs your help. The admission clearly cost him something. Sophie could see the pride he had to swallow to make it. I can come 3 days a week, she offered. But you have to be here too, no delegating. Ethan nodded solemnly. Deal. Thurston, over the next 2 weeks, Sophie arrived at the Carter estate every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Each time she found Ethan waiting, his suit jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, ready to work. Together, they tended to Storm King, whose health improved steadily. Ethan had placed the gentle mare, Willow, in the adjoining stall, and the two horses often stood with their heads close together over a divider. See how he brightens when she's near, Sophie pointed out. That's what horses need, connection. Is that what all living things need? Ethan asked, watching her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. Most, I think, she replied, focusing on measuring herbs to avoid his gaze. As days passed, Sophie taught Ethan the basics of natural horsemanship, how to read a horse's body language, how to earn trust rather than demand compliance, how to be a partner rather than just an owner. To her surprise, Ethan proved an eager student. The corporate executive who barked orders and expected immediate results gradually gave way to a more patient man who found satisfaction in small victories, Storm King accepting an apple from his hand, nickering when Ethan entered the stable, eventually allowing Ethan to lead him around the paddock. He's remembering who he is, Sophie said as they watched Storm King trot with newfound energy. His spirit is coming back. Thanks to you, Ethan said, his voice warm. Sophie shook her head. Thanks to you mostly. You're the one who's been here every day doing the work. Under your guidance, Ethan insisted. I wouldn't have known where to begin without you. The compliment brought a flush to Sophie's cheeks. She'd grown uncomfortably aware of Ethan's presence lately. The way his rolled-up sleeves revealed tanned forearms, how his serious expression gave way to genuine smiles more frequently, the unexpected gentleness in his hands when he worked with Storm King. I should go, she said abruptly, gathering her things. My mother needs help with the garden today. Ethan walked her to her truck. She'd started driving herself after the first week, uncomfortable with the formality of being chauffeured. Sophie, he said as she climbed in, would you consider having dinner with me tomorrow night? The invitation, caught her completely off guard. "Dinner?" "To thank you properly for everything you've done," he explained quickly. "There's a nice restaurant in town." "I know it," Sophie interrupted, thinking of the upscale place where she'd never been able to afford a meal. "But I don't think that's a good idea." Ethan's face fell slightly. "May I ask why not?" Sophie sighed, searching for the right words. "Because I'm the poor local woman you hired to help your horse, and you're... well, people would talk." "Let them," Ethan said dismissively. "It's different for you," Sophie tried to explain. "You don't have to live in this community the way I do." Ethan considered this. "Then not in town, at my house. I'm a decent cook, believe it or not." The alternative was somehow more intimidating. "Ethan, just dinner," he insisted. "A proper thank you, nothing more." Something in his expression, a mixture of hope and uncharacteristic uncertainty, made it impossible to refuse. "All right," she agreed. "Just dinner." His smile was worth the flutter of nerves his invitation had triggered. "Tomorrow at 7, Sophie." Nodded, then drove away with her heart beating strangely fast. It was just a thank you dinner, she reminded herself, nothing more. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she was crossing a boundary that might change everything. When Sophie arrived home, she found her mother at the kitchen table with a grave expression and an official-looking letter in her hands. "What's wrong?" Sophie asked, setting down her bag. Martha pushed the letter across the table. "The bank's moved up the foreclosure timeline. We have 30 days to come up with the full amount we owe, or we lose the farm." Sophie sank into a chair, the brief happiness from her time with Ethan evaporating. "That's impossible. We'd need over $12,000. "I know." Martha's voice trembled. "I've called everyone I could think of. No one can lend us that kind of money." Sophie thought of the checks Ethan had written her for Storm King's care, generous by her standards, but nowhere near enough to save their home. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was helping save a millionaire's horse while unable to save her own family's farm. "There has to be something we can do," Sophie insisted. Martha reached across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "You've done everything you could, honey. Maybe it's time to accept that we'll have to start fresh somewhere else." "This land has been in our family for generations," Sophie protested. "Dad would have wanted us to fight for. Your father would have wanted us to be happy wherever we are," Martha said gently. "Maybe this is a sign to let go." That night, Sophie lay awake thinking about the farm, about Storm King, and about Ethan Carter. In just a few weeks, he had shown himself capable of change, of growth. He had reconnected with a part of himself he'd forgotten, the part that cared about more than profit margins and winning. But would that change extend to helping someone like her? And could she bring herself to ask? The dinner invitation now felt complicated. Was it truly just gratitude or something more? And if it was something more, could she allow herself to explore those feelings when their worlds were so different as... Dawn broke. Sophie made a decision. She would go to dinner with Ethan, she would enjoy his company, but she would not ask for his help with the farm. Her pride wouldn't allow it. What she didn't know was that Ethan had been making plans of his own, plans that would soon force Sophie to choose between her pride and her home, between protecting her heart and risking it all. Sophie stood in front of her closet, frowning at the limited options. She rarely had occasion to dress up, and nothing seemed right for dinner at Ethan Carter's mansion. How about this one? Martha held up a simple blue dress that Sophie had worn to her cousin's wedding 2 years ago. "Do you think it's too fancy?" Sophie asked, biting her lip. "Or not fancy enough?" Martha smiled knowingly. "It's perfect, and it brings out your eyes." "It's just a thank you dinner, Mama," Sophie said, though her nervous stomach suggested otherwise. Martha replied, unconvinced. "That's why you've tried on everything you own twice." Sophie sighed, taking the blue dress. "I don't even know why I agreed to go. We're from different worlds." "Maybe," Martha said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "But that boy's been alone in his fancy house for too long, and so have you, in your own way." "I'm not alone. I have you and my work." "You know what I mean." Martha patted her hand. "Just enjoy the evening. Don't worry about worlds colliding or whatever's got you twisted up inside." As Sophie dressed, she couldn't help thinking about The foreclosure notice. 30 days wasn't enough time to save the farm, not unless a miracle happened. The thought of losing her childhood home, the place where her father had taught her everything she knew about animals and healing, made her chest ache. But she pushed those thoughts aside as she applied a touch of mascara and lip gloss. Tonight wasn't about the farm's problems. It was about, well, she wasn't entirely sure what it was about, but she was determined to enjoy it. Ethan paced his kitchen, checking the roast in the oven for the third time. It had been years since he'd cooked for anyone. The kitchen staff had been given the night off, despite their obvious curiosity about his dinner guest. He'd chosen to prepare the meal himself, wanting the evening to feel personal rather than formal. The dining room, with its 20-foot table, had seemed too impersonal, so he'd set up on the terrace overlooking the stables and pastures. When the doorbell rang, Ethan felt an unexpected flutter of nerves. He straightened his casual button-down shirt and ran a hand through his hair before opening the door. The sight of Sophie in her blue dress momentarily took his breath away. Her honey-brown hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and without her usual practical clothes, her natural grace was more apparent. "You look beautiful," he said, the words escaping before he could consider them. Sophie blushed, her eyes darting away. "Thank you. This place is even more impressive up close." Ethan suddenly saw his home through her eyes. The grand foyer with its sweeping staircase, the expensive artwork, the sheer size of it all. It seemed excessive in a way it never had before. "It's too much house for one person," he admitted, guiding her through to the terrace. "But wait until you see this view." Sophie gasped softly as they stepped outside. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the rolling pastures where horses grazed peacefully. In the distance, the stable where they'd spent so many hours with Storm King was visible. "It's breathtaking," she said. "The first time I saw this property, I knew I had to have it," Ethan told her, pulling out a chair for her at the small table he'd set. "It reminded me of the farm we lost when I was a boy, only bigger. Sometimes I think the small family farms have more soul," Sophie said, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry, that sounded honest," Ethan finished for her, smiling. "Don't apologize for that. It's one of the things I admire about you." Their eyes met briefly before Ethan turned away to pour wine. "I hope you like roast chicken. It's one of the few things I know how to make properly. It smells wonderful." Sophie relaxed a little as Ethan served the food. "I didn't know you cooked." "There's a lot you don't know about me," he replied, sitting across from her. "Just like there's a lot I don't know about you." As they ate, the conversation flowed more easily than either had expected. Ethan told stories of his early days building his breeding business, the mistakes he'd made, and the lucky breaks that had saved him. Sophie shared tales of growing up on her small farm, learning her gift with animals from her father, and the local characters who had shaped her life. "So your father taught you everything you know about healing animals?" Ethan asked as they finished the main course. Sophie nodded, a hint of sadness crossing her face. "He had a special way with them. Everyone in the county brought their sick animals to him. When he died 5 years ago, people started bringing them to me instead. I'm still learning, really." "You seem pretty masterful to me," Ethan said. "Storm King's recovery has been remarkable." "That's because you did the work," Sophie insisted. "You showed up every day." Ethan's expression turned thoughtful. "You know, I used to do all the work myself. When I first started out, I couldn't afford help. I fed the horses, mucked the stalls, trained them myself. What changed?" "Success," he said simply. "The more I won, the bigger everything got. More horses, more staff, more pressure. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing the horses as well as living beings that needed connection. They became assets, investments. And now?" Sophie asked softly. Ethan met her gaze. "Now I'm remembering what I loved about it in the first place." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken meaning. Ethan cleared his throat. "How about dessert? I didn't make it, but my chef left us a chocolate cake that looks amazing." While he went to get the dessert, Sophie wandered to the terrace railing, looking out over the beautiful property. In the distance, she could see Storm King in a small paddock, Willow grazing nearby. The sight made her smile. "They look happy." "Together," Ethan said, coming to stand beside her with dessert plates in hand. They do, Sophie agreed. Animals are simple that way. They know what they need: food, shelter, companionship. Humans make everything so complicated. Speaking of complicated, Ethan said, an odd note entering his voice. I wanted to discuss something with you. Sophie turned to face him, something in his tone making her wary. What is it? It's about Storm King, Ethan began, setting the dessert on a small table. He's recovering well, faster than I'd hoped. That's good news, isn't it? It is. Ethan seemed to choose his next words carefully. I've had an offer for him, a very substantial offer from Jameson Racing. Sophie felt a strange hollowness open in her chest. You're selling him. That was always the plan, Ethan explained. Storm King was bred to be a champion racehorse and then a breeding stallion. His value is at its peak right now. But he's just recovering, Sophie protested. He needs stability, consistency. Being sold, moved to a new environment, new handlers, it could set him back. The sale wouldn't happen immediately, Ethan assured her, and I'd make sure they understand his special needs. Sophie stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warm evening. Special needs? You mean the fact that he's not just a machine for making money? That he needs connection and care like any living creature? Ethan frowned. Sophie, this is business. Storm King has always been an investment. Then why did you spend weeks reconnecting with him? Why put in all that time and effort if you were just going to sell him the moment he was better? I never pretended otherwise, Ethan said, his voice hardening slightly. Breeding and selling horses is what I do. Sophie shook her head, a wave of disappointment washing over her. I thought things were changing. That you were changing. This isn't about change, Ethan insisted. It's about being practical. The offer from Jameson is $8 million, plus breeding rights. That kind of opportunity doesn't come along every day? No, I suppose it doesn't, Sophie said quietly. She turned back to the view, no longer seeing its beauty. When will you tell the buyer that Storm King's recovery was thanks to herbs and a country girl's superstitions? Ethan sighed. That's not fair. I've never dismissed what you do. I've seen the results firsthand. But it doesn't change anything, does it? In the end, the bottom line is what matters most to you. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Sophie felt foolish for having imagined Ethan could change so fundamentally. Of course he would sell Storm King. That was his business model, his life's work. She had been naive to think their time together meant more than that. I should go, she said finally, turning toward the house. Sophie, wait. Ethan caught her arm gently. There's something else I wanted to discuss. She looked at him warily. I know about your farm, he said. About the foreclosure. Sophie stiffened. How did you... This is a small community. Word gets around. Ethan's expression was unreadable. I'd like to help. Help, Sophie echoed, a cold feeling spreading through her chest. I could pay off the mortgage, Ethan said. You and your mother could stay on the land, keep the farm running. Sophie pulled her arm from his grasp. In exchange for what? Ethan looked taken aback. There's no exchange, it would be a gift. From the man who just told me everything is business? Sophie shook her head in disbelief. I don't think so. This is different, Ethan insisted. This is personal. Is it? Sophie challenged. Or is it just another transaction? Help the poor local girl so she'll keep healing your valuable horses? Anger flashed across Ethan's face. That's not what this is about. I care about you, Sophie. You care about what I can do for you, she corrected, tears threatening despite her best efforts. Just like you care about what Storm King can do for you. It's all about utility and value, isn't it? That's not fair, Ethan said, his voice rising. I've shown you nothing but respect. I've valued your expertise, your methods, but not enough to change how you do business, Sophie cut in. Not enough to see Storm King as more than a commodity. Ethan ran a hand through his hair in frustration. What do you want from me? To give up my entire business model because of one horse? To keep every animal I breed until they die of old age? That's not a business. It's a sanctuary. Maybe there's a middle ground, Sophie suggested. Maybe success doesn't have to mean selling. To the highest bidder, especially when you know it might harm the animal. You don't understand how this industry works, Ethan said dismissively. No, I understand perfectly, Sophie replied, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. I just don't agree with it. She moved toward the French doors leading back into the house. I appreciate the dinner, but I think I should leave now. Sophie, please. Ethan's voice had lost its edge. Don't leave like this. At least let me drive you home. I drove myself, remember? She paused at the doorway. I think it's best if I don't come back for Storm King's treatments. He's stable now, and you know what to do. Carlos can take over. This is absurd, Ethan protested. You're going to abandon Storm King because you disagree with my business decisions. The accusation stung. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm removing myself from a situation that I should never have gotten involved in to begin with. She took a deep breath. As for your offer about my farm, thank you, but no, we'll find another way. There is no other way, Ethan said flatly. Not in the time frame you have. Then we'll lose it, Sophie replied, lifting her chin. At least, we'll keep our integrity. She left quickly after that, ignoring Ethan's calls for her to wait, to talk this through. Tears blurred her vision as she drove down the long, winding driveway away from the Carter estate. By the time she reached home, Sophie had composed herself enough to present a calm facade to her mother. But Martha knew her daughter too well. What happened? She asked as Sophie slumped into a kitchen chair. Nothing, Sophie said, then sighed at her mother's skeptical look. Everything. He's selling Storm King and he offered to pay off our mortgage. Martha's eyes widened. He what? He wants to save our farm, Sophie explained wearily. As a gift, he claims. And that made you upset because, Martha prompted. Because it's not a gift, Mama, it's a transaction. He needs my skills for his horses, so he's making sure I stick around. Martha sat down across from her. Are you sure that's all it is? He couldn't possibly just care about you. Men like Ethan Carter don't change their entire worldview in a few weeks, Sophie insisted. He sees everything in terms of investments and returns, including me, apparently. Martha was quiet for a moment. So what now? We just lose the farm. The reality of their situation hit Sophie anew. I'll keep looking for options. Maybe the bank will extend the timeline if we can make a partial payment. And if they won't? Martha asked gently. Sophie had no answer for that. And the next morning, Sophie buried herself in work, taking on every job she could find. A neighbor's milk cow with mastitis, the Henderson's mare with colic again, a local shelter with a litter of sick kittens, anything to keep her mind off Ethan Carter and Storm King. But as evening approached, Sophie found herself driving past the Carter estate on her way home. She slowed, gazing at the beautiful property she'd come to know so well over the past weeks. In her mind's eye, she could see Storm King in his stall, perhaps wondering why she hadn't come today. It's for the best, she told herself firmly, pressing the accelerator. When she arrived home, an unfamiliar truck was parked in their driveway. Inside, she found her mother talking with Carlos, Storm King's groom. Carlos? Sophie asked in surprise. What are you doing here? The young man stood nervously. I came to tell you about Storm King. He's not doing well since you left. He's refusing food, pacing his stall. Mr. Carter is worried. I'm sure Mr. Carter can find another specialist, Sophie said. Though the news about Storm King troubled her, Carlos shook his head. It's not the same. Storm King trusts you. He paused, then added, and I think Mr. Carter does too. Well, his trust has conditions, Sophie replied bitterly. Carlos glanced at Martha, then back to Sophie. Maybe, but he's been different since you started working with him. Everyone at the stable has noticed. He's more hands-on, more human. Until it affects his bottom line, Sophie pointed out. I don't know about all that, Carlos said. But I do know he was up all night with Storm King trying to calm him down. He cancelled all his meetings today to stay in the stable. This information gave Sophie pause. The Ethan she'd first met would never have cancelled meetings for a horse. I'll think about it, she finally said. After Carlos left, Martha gave her daughter a knowing look. You're going to go, aren't you? I don't know, Sophie admitted. I'm still angry with him. Seems to me, Martha said carefully, that being angry with someone means you care what they think and do. That's not nothing. Sophie considered this as she prepared for bed. She did care about Ethan more than she wanted to admit, and she certainly cared about Storm King. But could she set aside her principles just because her heart was involved? Sleep eluded her as she wrestled with the dilemma. Around midnight, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Storm King still won't eat. I don't know what to do. Please help. Ethan." Sophie stared at the message, feeling the pull of responsibility. Whatever her feelings about Ethan and his business practices, Storm King was an innocent animal who needed her. With a sigh, she texted back, "I'll be there in the morning." When Sophie arrived at the Carter estate the next day, Ethan was in Storm King's stall looking haggard. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually impeccable appearance was disheveled. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. Sophie nodded, moving past him to examine the horse. Storm King's condition had indeed deteriorated. His eyes were dull, his posture dejected. She ran her hands along his neck and sides, feeling the tension in his muscles. "He needs to go outside," she said. "With Willow. He's been cooped up too. Long feeling your stress?" Ethan nodded without argument. "I'll have Carlos. Prepare the paddock." As they waited for the paddock to be made ready, an uncomfortable silence stretched between them. "I'm sorry," Ethan finally said. "For how our dinner ended." Sophie nodded, acknowledging the apology, without accepting it fully. I've been thinking about what you said," he continued, "about finding a middle ground." This caught Sophie's attention. And I don't have all the answers yet," Ethan admitted. "But I know I don't want to lose your respect, or your friendship." "Is that what we have? Friendship?" Sophie asked softly. Ethan met her gaze directly. "I think we could have much more than that if you'd give us a chance." Before Sophie could respond, Carlos appeared to tell them the paddock was ready. The moment broken, they led Storm King. Outside together, Willow already waiting in the enclosed space. The effect was immediate. Storm King perked up at the sight of his companion, trotting over to greet her. Within minutes, the two horses were grazing peacefully side by side. "See?" Sophie said. "Connection. It heals." "Is that what we need?" Ethan asked, still watching her rather than the horses. "Connection." Sophie felt her resolve weakening under his earnest gaze. "It's not that simple, Ethan." "Why not? Why can't it be simple?" "I care about you, Sophie. More than I expected to, more than I've cared about anyone in a long time. But we want different things," Sophie insisted. "You see the world one way, I see it another." "People can change," Ethan said. "I'm willing to try, if you're willing, to show me how." Sophie hesitated, torn between her growing feelings for him and her fear that fundamental differences would eventually tear them apart. "What about Storm King?" she asked. "Are you still selling him?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I spoke with Jameson this morning. I told him the deal is off." Sophie's eyes widened in surprise. "You did?" "I did," Ethan confirmed. "I told him Storm King isn't just a racehorse anymore. He's part of what's helping me remember why I got into this business in the first place." "And why was that?" Sophie asked. "Because I love horses," Ethan said simply. "Not just winning with them or profiting from them. I loved being with them, understanding them. You helped me remember that." Sophie felt a warmth spreading through her chest. "That must have been a difficult call to make. Less difficult than I expected," Ethan admitted, "especially when I thought about how you'd react." Their eyes met, and Sophie saw a vulnerability in Ethan she hadn't witnessed before. He was trying, really trying, to bridge the gap between them. "What about your offer to help with my farm?" she asked cautiously. "That stands with no strings attached," Ethan replied. "But I understand if your pride won't let you accept. Just know the offer is there because I care about you, not because I want something in return." Sophie looked out at the horses, considering his words. "I need time to think about it." "Take all the time you need," Ethan said. "I'm not going anywhere." As they stood side by side, watching Storm King and Willow grazing contentedly, Sophie felt something shift inside her. Maybe there was a middle ground after all, a place where Ethan's world and hers could meet without either having to sacrifice who they were. "Would you be willing to come to dinner at my house tomorrow?" she asked suddenly. Nothing fancy, just simple farm cooking with me and my mother. Ethan smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. I'd like that very much. Sophie nodded, returning, his smile cautiously. It's a start. What neither of them realized was that forces beyond their control were already in motion. Forces that would soon test their newfound understanding and force them both to decide what truly mattered most. Sophie spent the entire day preparing for Ethan's visit. She dusted corners of the farmhouse that hadn't seen a cloth in years, picked fresh flowers for the table, and fussed over the menu until her mother finally shooed her out of the kitchen. It's just pot roast, not a 5-course meal, Martha said, with amusement. Now go make yourself presentable while I finish up. Sophie changed 3 times before settling on a simple sundress with a light cardigan. As she brushed her hair, she caught sight of her reflection and paused. The woman in the mirror looked nervous, hopeful, and afraid all at once. It's just dinner, she told herself, firmly. Yet she knew it was much more than that. By inviting Ethan into her home, she was opening a door that couldn't easily be closed again. At precisely 6 o'clock, the crunch of tires on gravel announced his arrival. Sophie's heart skipped as she watched from the window. Ethan stepped out of his car, not the sleek luxury sedan she'd expected, but a modest truck. He wore jeans and a casual button-down shirt, and in his hands was a bouquet of wildflowers. He's trying, Martha observed from behind her. That counts for something. Sophie nodded, taking a deep breath before opening the door. Ethan's smile was warm but tinged with uncertainty. I wasn't sure what to bring, he said, offering the flowers. The fancy wine in my cellar seemed wrong somehow. These are perfect, Sophie assured him, touched by his thoughtfulness. Come in. As they entered the living room, Sophie watched. Ethan taken her modest home, the well-worn furniture, the handmade quilts, the family photos covering one wall. There was no disguising the age of the house or its simple furnishings, but it was clean, comfortable, and filled with love. What? A wonderful place, Ethan said sincerely. It feels like a real home. It is, Sophie replied simply. It's not much compared to your estate, but it's better, Ethan interrupted. My house is impressive, not welcoming. There's a difference. Martha appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. You must be Ethan. I'm Martha, Sophie's mother. Ma'am, Ethan said respectfully, extending his hand. Thank you for having me. Well, any man who can get my daughter this flustered is worth meeting, Martha replied with a twinkle in her eye, ignoring Sophie's mortified expression. Dinner's almost ready. Sophie, why don't you show Ethan around while I finish up? Grateful for the excuse to escape her mother's teasing, Sophie led Ethan outside. The evening was mild, the setting sun painting the modest farm in golden light. It's not much land, Sophie said as they walked. 10 acres, but it's been in my family for 4 generations. That's what makes it special, Ethan observed. My property is larger, but it has no history, at least not my history. They stopped at the small barn where Sophie kept her medical supplies and treated local animals. Inside, her old mare Penny nickered softly in greeting. This is where you work your magic, Ethan said, looking around with interest at the herbs hanging to dry, the neat rows of bottles and tinctures. Not magic, Sophie corrected. Just listening to what the animals and plants have to teach us. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. I've been doing a lot of thinking since yesterday about business, success, what it all means. And? Sophie prompted. And I'm starting to realize I've been measuring the wrong things. He turned to face her directly. When I was a boy, before we lost our farm, I loved the animals for themselves. I knew each one by name, by personality. Somewhere along the way, I started seeing them as assets, not living beings. It's an easy trap to fall into, Sophie said gently. But not an inevitable one, Ethan replied. You've managed to make a life caring for animals without losing sight of their worth beyond money. A life that's about to include foreclosure, Sophie reminded him with a sad smile. Ethan hesitated. Sophie, about your farm, let's not talk about that tonight, she interrupted. Let's just enjoy dinner. Back inside, Martha had set the table with their best dishes, mismatched china inherited from grandparents and great-aunts, each piece with its own story. The pot roast filled the small dining room with a mouth-watering aroma. To Sophie's surprise, Ethan seemed perfectly at ease in their humble home. He complimented Martha's cooking enthusiastically, listened with genuine interest to family stories, and even shared a few tales of his own. Not about business triumphs, but about his childhood. On the farm his family had lost. "My father was a proud man," he told them over coffee and Martha's apple pie. Too proud to admit when he was in over his head. By the time he sought help, it was too late to save the farm. Martha nodded in understanding. Pride can be a double-edged sword. It gives us strength, but it can also blind us to when we need help. Her pointed glance at Sophie didn't go unnoticed. Sophie shifted uncomfortably, knowing her mother was referring to their own situation. After dinner, Martha conveniently remembered an evening church committee meeting, leaving Sophie and Ethan alone. They settled on the porch swing, the night air cool and fragrant with the scent of honeysuckle. "Thank you for dinner," Ethan said. "It's been a long time since I enjoyed a meal that much." "It's just simple food," Sophie demurred. "It's not just the food, it's the company, the conversation." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Being here, in this house, with you and your mother, it reminded me of what a real home feels like." Sophie gazed out at the darkening fields, the familiar landscape that might soon belong to strangers. "I can't imagine losing this place." "You don't have to," Ethan said softly. Sophie shook her head. "Ethan, I told you." "I know what you told me," he interrupted gently. "But I want you to hear me out. Please." Something in his voice made Sophie turn to look at him. His expression was more open, more vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. "I've drawn up papers for a business partnership," he said. "Not a gift, not a loan. A partnership between your knowledge of natural horsemanship and my resources." Sophie frowned. "What kind of partnership?" "I want to expand Carter Thoroughbreds to include a natural healing center for horses," Ethan explained. "Using your methods, your expertise. We'd offer services to other breeders, trainers, even ordinary horse owners. Your family farm would be part of the operation, a place for horses who need special recovery care, away from the pressured environment of the racing world." Sophie stared at him in disbelief. "You want to go into business with me?" "I do," Ethan confirmed. "As equal partners, you'd maintain control over all treatment protocols. I'd handle the business side." "But why? Your breeding operation is already successful." "Because you were right about finding a middle ground," Ethan said. "I don't have to choose between profit and compassion. I can find a way to honor both." He took her hand gently. "And because I want you in my life, Sophie, not as an employee, not as someone I helped out of charity, as a partner, in every sense of the word." Sophie's heart raced at his words, at the sincerity in his eyes. "This is a lot to take in." "I know," Ethan acknowledged. "Take all the time you need to think about it. The papers are in my truck whenever you're ready to look at them." They sat in silence for a while, the porch swing creaking softly as Sophie processed his proposal. It was a perfect solution in many ways. She could keep her family's land, continue her work with animals, and be with Ethan. But something still nagged at her. "What if it doesn't work out?" she asked finally. "Between us, I mean." "The partnership would stand regardless," Ethan assured her. "It's a sound business proposition on its own merits." He squeezed her hand gently. "But I'm hoping that won't be an issue." Sophie met his gaze, seeing the hope there, the vulnerability, and something else, something that made her breath catch. "So am I," she admitted softly. The Vaisiu. Following morning, Sophie drove to the Carter estate to check on Storm King. She found Ethan in the paddock with the stallion and Willow, simply observing them. He was dressed for manual work rather than business, and there was a contentment about him that she hadn't seen before. "Look at him," Ethan said as she approached, nodding toward Storm King. "He's almost back to his old self." The stallion did, indeed, look healthier. His coat regaining its shine, his movements more energetic. He trotted over when he saw Sophie, nudging her pocket for treats. "He remembers who brings the good stuff," she laughed, offering him an apple slice. "Smart horse," Ethan commented with a smile. "He knows who to trust." They spent the morning working together, evaluating Storm King's progress and discussing his continued care. The easy partnership they'd developed over the past weeks had returned, the tension from their argument fading. "I've been thinking about your proposal," Sophie said as they shared a simple lunch at the stable office. "It's a generous offer." "It's a practical one," Ethan countered. "Your methods work. They saved Storm King when conventional approaches failed. There's a market for that expertise." "But is that why you're doing this?" Sophie asked directly. "Because it makes business sense?" Ethan considered the question seriously. "Partly," he admitted. "I won't pretend otherwise, but mostly I'm doing it because I want to build something meaningful with you, Sophie." He reached across the table to take her hand. "Meeting you changed something in me, reminded me of what matters." Sophie believed him. The change was visible in how he interacted with the horses, with his staff, even in his more relaxed manner of dress today. "I'm not asking you to become someone you're not," she said carefully. "You're a businessman. That's part of who you are. And you're someone who puts principles above profit," Ethan replied. "That's part of who you are, and I admire it." He smiled. "Maybe we need each other's perspective." Sophie couldn't help returning his smile. "Maybe we do." The sound of tires on gravel interrupted their moment. Through the office window, Sophie saw an expensive black car pull up to the main house. A tall man in an impeccable suit stepped out, his bearing confident to the point of arrogance. Ethan's expression darkened. "Richard Jameson, what's he doing here?" They watched as Ethan's assistant Rebecca hurried out to greet the visitor, clearly surprised by his arrival. "I should go see what he wants," Ethan said, rising from his chair. Sophie nodded. "Of course." As Ethan left, Sophie remained in the stable office, an uneasy feeling settling in her stomach. Richard Jameson was the man who had wanted to buy Storm King, the deal Ethan had cancelled. His unexpected appearance couldn't be a coincidence. Unable to contain her curiosity, Sophie made her way toward the main house, staying out of sight. Through an open window, she could hear raised voices from Ethan's office. "You can't back out." "Now, Carter," Jameson was saying, his tone aggressive. "We had a deal. We had a verbal agreement that I chose not to pursue," Ethan replied calmly. "Nothing was signed." "Don't play games with me," Jameson snapped. "You promised me that horse." "Circumstances changed," Ethan said. "Storm King is no longer for sale. I've made that clear." "Because some country girl convinced you the horse has feelings?" Jameson's voice dripped with derision. "I didn't take you for a fool, Ethan." Sophie winced at the description, but continued. "Listening. Careful, Richard," Ethan warned, his voice hardening. "My business decisions are my own." "This isn't just business," Jameson countered. "This is personal. You're trying to get back at me for outbidding you on the Kentucky property." "That's ridiculous," Ethan scoffed. "Is it?" Jameson challenged. "Then explain why you suddenly decided to keep a horse you were desperate to sell just a month ago. Everyone knows you've been planning to use the money from Storm King to finance your expansion plans." Sophie's blood ran cold. Expansion plans? Was that what Ethan's natural healing? Santa's proposal was really about just another business strategy. "My plans have changed," Ethan was saying. "Storm King stays here." "Fine," Jameson replied, his voice suddenly calculating. "Keep the horse, but you should know I've made an offer on another property you might be interested in. A small family farm about 20 minutes from here. Matthews, I believe the name is." Sophie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What are you talking about?" Ethan demanded. "The bank is foreclosing," Jameson explained with malicious pleasure. "I've offered to buy the note. By this time tomorrow, I'll own it." "You son of a—" Ethan started. Now, Jameson interrupted. "It's just business, right? Nothing personal. Though I did hear the place has some sentimental value to your new friend." Unable to listen anymore, Sophie backed away from the window. Her mind raced. Jameson was buying their farm out of spite, to get back at Ethan. And Ethan's expansion plans? Had everything he told her been a lie? A convenient story to get her to trust him? She hurried back to the stables, grabbed her bag, and drove home, her vision blurred with unshed tears. At home, she found her mother going through old photo albums at the kitchen table. "Sophie." Martha looked up in concern. What's wrong? Sophie collapsed into a chair, finally letting the tears fall. I heard Ethan talking with Richard Jameson. Jameson is buying our mortgage from the bank. Martha paled. Why would he do that? To get back at Ethan, Sophie explained through her tears. It's all been a game to them. Rich men using us as pawns. And Ethan? What did he say? Martha asked. He seemed angry, but Sophie shook her head. I don't know what to believe anymore. Jameson mentioned Ethan had expansion plans that depended on selling Storm King. What if his partnership offer was just another business strategy? Martha reached across the table to take her daughter's hand. Did you ask him about it? I couldn't, Sophie admitted. I left before they finished talking. I couldn't bear to hear more. So you're judging him without all the facts, Martha observed gently. The facts are that in 3 days we'll be homeless, Sophie said miserably. Either the bank will own our farm or Richard Jameson will. It doesn't matter what Ethan's intentions were. The sound of a vehicle approaching made them both look up. Through the window, Sophie saw Ethan's truck skidding to a stop in their driveway. He jumped out and strode toward the house with purpose in every step. Do you want me to send him away? Martha asked. Sophie shook her head, wiping her tears. No, I need to hear what he has to say. When Ethan burst through the door, his face was a storm of emotions, anger, concern, determination. Sophie, he said, slightly out of breath, I've been looking everywhere for you. I heard, she said simply, about Jameson buying our farm. Ethan's expression darkened further. You heard part of it, not all of it. He moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Sophie, listen to me. Jameson is trying to manipulate both of us. Yes, I had expansion plans that originally involved selling Storm King, but that was before... Before what? Sophie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before you, Ethan said simply. Before I remembered why I got into this business in the first place. Before I realized there are more important things than winning or beating rivals like Jameson. Martha quietly slipped out of the kitchen, giving them privacy. The partnership I offered you isn't part of some scheme. Ethan continued earnestly. It's because I believe in what you do. It's because I... He paused, taking a deep breath. It's because I love you, Sophie. The words hung in the air between them. Sophie stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception. She found none, only vulnerability and hope. I know it's fast, Ethan acknowledged. Too fast, maybe. But when you've spent your life guarding your heart as carefully as I have, recognizing love when it finally comes is overwhelming. Sophie's own heart raced at his words. What about Jameson and our farm? I've already called my lawyer, Ethan said. We're preparing a counteroffer to the bank, more than Jameson offered. They'll take it, they just want their money. So you'll own our farm instead, Sophie said, still uncertain. No, Ethan shook his head firmly. The farm will be put in a trust, with you and your mother as beneficiaries. No strings attached, no business connection. Whether you accept my partnership offer or not, whether you... He swallowed hard. Whether you return my feelings or not, your home will be safe. Sophie felt tears welling again, but for a different reason now. Why would you do that? Because you showed me what matters, Ethan said simply. You showed me that some things shouldn't be measured in dollars. Some things are sacred. In that moment, looking into his eyes, Sophie knew he was telling the truth. The man before her wasn't the cold businessman she'd first met. He had changed, not completely perhaps, but enough to recognize what was truly important. I love you too, she whispered, the words escaping before she could overthink them. I've been fighting it because I was afraid we were too different, that it could never work. We are different, Ethan agreed, reaching up to brush a tear from her cheek. And that's exactly why it can work. We balance each other. He leaned forward, hesitating just a breath away from her lips. May I? Sophie answered by closing the distance between them, her heart soaring as their lips met in a kiss filled with promise and new beginnings. 3 months later, the autumn sun cast a golden glow over the newly renovated barn. What had once been a simple structure on the Matthews farm was now an elegant yet practical natural healing center for horses, the first of its kind in the region. Sophie watched with pride as local farmers, horse breeders, and even a few reporters toured the facility. Her mother stood nearby, beaming as she explained the medicinal herb garden they had expanded. "Quite a transformation," a familiar voice said behind her. Sophie turned to find Ethan, looking relaxed and happy in jeans and a button-down shirt, his tie abandoned hours ago during the preparations. "For this open house, it still feels like a dream," Sophie admitted. "A dream you made happen," Ethan reminded her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Your knowledge, your methods, I just provided the backing." "We did it together," Sophie corrected, leaning into his embrace. "That's the whole point." The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, Ethan had secured the Matthews farm, placing it in an irrevocable trust for Sophie and her mother. Their partnership agreement, both professional and personal, had been formalized, with Sophie overseeing all treatment protocols at the new healing center and Ethan handling the business operations. Richard Jameson had been furious at being outmaneuvered, but his anger had faded when his own thoroughbred developed mysterious symptoms that no conventional vet could diagnose. His pride had lasted exactly 2 weeks before he'd called Sophie for help. Now, as they watched people admiring the center, Sophie felt a sense of completeness she'd never experienced before. Her life's work was flourishing, her family home was secure, and her heart had found its match in a man who balanced her perfectly. "There's Storm King," Ethan said, nodding toward the paddock where the magnificent stallion was showing off for visitors, Willow grazing peacefully nearby. "Hard to believe he was at death's door just a few months ago. He just needed to remember what it meant to be a horse," Sophie said. "To connect. Like I needed to remember what it meant to truly care for something beyond profit," Ethan added, his arm tightening around her. As the sun began to set, the visitors gradually departed, leaving them alone in the peaceful evening. They walked, hand in hand, to the paddock, where Storm King trotted over to greet them, his eyes bright with recognition. "I have something to ask you," Ethan said as they leaned against the fence, watching the horses. Sophie turned to him, curious at his suddenly serious tone. To her astonishment, Ethan dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Sophie Matthews, you taught me that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold. You showed me how to reconnect with what truly matters." He opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" Sophie's heart swelled with joy as she nodded through happy tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." As Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her, Storm King nickered softly, as if offering his approval. In the golden light of sunset, with the land her family had tended for generations stretching around them, Sophie knew they had both found their true home, not in a place, but in each other's hearts. Their worlds had collided and transformed each other in the process. Ethan had learned that success could be measured in more than dollars, and Sophie had discovered that accepting help didn't mean sacrificing independence. Together, they had found the perfect balance, like wildflowers and cultivated gardens, like freedom and security, like the primal connection between a human and a horse. As they walked back toward the farmhouse, now aglow with warm light against the darkening sky, Sophie couldn't help but smile at the journey that had brought them. Here, a sick horse, a desperate man, a woman with healing hands, and the unexpected love that had healed them all. The end.